Clara's entire future disintegrated when she discovered her mail-order husband had died weeks before her arrival, leaving her sobbing and alone in a hostile frontier town. The Apache scout's gentle words pierced through her despair. "You don't have to pretend with me." Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The setting sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Silver Creek, Arizona Territory, June 1873. The air was dry, the heat still clinging to the weathered wooden buildings despite the approaching evening. The stagecoach rolled to a stop with a creak of leather and wood, dust billowing around its wheels like ghosts of the miles traveled. Clara Ainsworth pressed her hand against the window, her reflection ghostly in the glass. Pale face framed by chestnut hair that had come loose from its pins during the journey, blue eyes shadowed by exhaustion. Her cream-colored traveling dress, once pristine when she'd boarded in Boston, was now creased and stained with the dust of 1,000 miles. The driver opened the door. "Silver Creek, last stop." Clara gathered her single carpet bag and stepped down, her legs unsteady after days of constant motion. The town sprawled before her, a mercantile, a saloon, a small church with a crooked steeple, and scattered houses. Nothing like the Boston streets she had known all her life. She clutched the letter in her pocket, the paper worn thin from constant reading. Mr. James Thornton, Box 27, Silver Creek, Arizona Territory. 6 weeks ago, she had answered his advertisement seeking a wife. 3 weeks ago, she had boarded the train with her father's angry words still ringing in her ears. "You'll be back when you discover how uncivilized the West truly is." Clara approached a man sweeping the boardwalk in front of the mercantile. "Excuse me, sir, could you direct me to the residence of Mr. James Thornton?" The man's broom stilled. He removed his hat, revealing thinning gray hair. "Miss, I'm afraid..." His voice trailed off. "Perhaps you should speak with Sheriff Miller. His office is just down the street." Something in his tone sent a chill through her despite the heat. Clara thanked him and walked toward the building with a weathered sign that read, "Sheriff," hanging askew above the door. Sheriff Miller was a broad-shouldered man with a mustache that drooped at the corners. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of her proper Eastern dress. "I'm Clara Ainsworth," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I've come to meet Mr. James Thornton. We've been corresponding and..." "Miss Ainsworth." The sheriff's interruption was gentle but firm. He gestured to a chair. "Please, sit down." She remained standing, her fingers tightening around the handle of her bag. "Has something happened?" "I'm sorry to tell you that James Thornton passed away 3 weeks ago. Mining accident, cave-in at the Silver Spike." The room seemed to tilt. "That can't be. I received his letter just before I left Boston." "Mail takes time out here." Sheriff Miller's voice was apologetic. "Might have crossed paths with the news." Clara's throat tightened. "I see." The words came out hollow. "Did you have other family here? Anyone expecting you?" She shook her head. James Thornton had been her only connection to this place. A man she had never met, but whose letters had offered her escape from mounting debts and her father's plans to marry her off to his elderly business partner. "There's a boarding house down the street," the sheriff offered. "Mrs. Henderson is a good woman." "Thank you," Clara whispered, though she knew her remaining coins would barely cover a single night's stay. Outside, the setting sun had given way to purple twilight. Clara walked blindly, her vision blurring with tears she refused to shed in public. At the edge of town, near where the stagecoach had stopped to deliver mail, she finally allowed herself to sink onto a bench beside a water trough. The tears came then, silent and hot against her cheeks. She was alone in a strange land, with no prospects, no money, and no way to return east. Her father had disowned her. There was nothing to go back to. She didn't notice the man approaching until his shadow fell across her. Startled, she looked up to see a tall figure silhouetted against the darkening sky. As he stepped closer, she could make out his features: copper skin, high cheekbones, and dark eyes that seemed to see right through her carefully maintained composure. He wore a mix of white man's clothing and traditional garments: cotton shirt, buckskin pants, and moccasins, with a red bandana tied around his neck. An Apache. Clara had heard stories, terrible stories, on the journey west. She stiffened, ready to flee, but then he held out a clean handkerchief. His voice, when he spoke, was deep and smooth, his English perfect but accented. "You don't have to pretend with me," he said quietly. Clara hesitated before taking the handkerchief. It was finely woven cotton with a simple embroidered edge. Not what she'd expected from an Apache. "Thank you," she murmured, dabbing at her tears, embarrassed to be found in such a state. "I'm sorry. I don't usually." "The stagecoach brings two kinds of people," he said, maintaining a respectful distance. "Those running to something and those running from something. Sometimes both." His eyes, dark and perceptive, studied her face. "You look like both." Clara straightened her shoulders. "I'm not running. I came to be married. To James Thornton." It wasn't a question. Her eyes widened. "How did you know?" "Small town, news travels." He glanced at her carpet bag. "And you're the only passenger who stayed when the coach left." Clara realized how exposed she was, alone with a stranger at dusk on the edge of town. Yet something in his demeanor kept fear at bay. He stood with his weight shifted away from her, hands visible, posture non-threatening. "I'm Marker," he said. "I work as a scout and translator for the territorial government." "Clara Ainsworth," she replied automatically, then faltered. I don't know what I'm going to do now." A shout from down the street made them both turn. 3 men had emerged from the saloon, their laughter rough-edged and loud. "Hey, Indian! Get away from the lady!" The tallest of the 3 started toward them, his gait unsteady from drink. Marker's expression didn't change, but Clara noticed his shoulders tense slightly. "Wilson," he acknowledged calmly. "She don't need your kind bothering her." Wilson slurred, coming closer. His companions hung back, watching. "Miss, you all right? This savage giving you trouble?" Clara's exhaustion gave way to indignation. "He was being a gentleman, which is more than I can say for someone shouting in the street." Wilson blinked, taken aback. "Just looking out for you, ma'am. Town ain't safe after dark, especially with certain elements around." His gaze slid meaningfully to Marker. "I appreciate your concern," Clara replied coolly, "but it's unwarranted." The man's face darkened. He opened his mouth to speak again, but a new voice cut through the tension. "That's enough, Wilson." Sheriff Miller approached from the direction of his office. "Miss Ainsworth needs rest, not your protection. And Marker's got more right to be in this town than you've earned." Wilson spat in the dirt, but retreated with a final glare at Marker. The sheriff turned to Clara. "Ma'am, I've spoken with Mrs. Henderson. She's expecting you at the boarding house." Clara's throat tightened. "I'm afraid I don't have sufficient funds for—" "First week's paid," the sheriff interrupted. "James Thornton left some money with me. Said it was to help get his bride settled when she arrived. Seems right you should have it." The unexpected kindness brought fresh tears to Clara's eyes. "Thank you. I'll walk you there," Marker offered, picking up her carpet bag before she could protest. "Sheriff," he nodded in acknowledgement. Miller tipped his hat. "Marker, Miss Ainsworth." He turned and walked away, leaving them alone again. They walked in silence for a moment, the dusty street now bathed in early moonlight. "Does that happen often?" Clara asked finally. "Men like Wilson. Often enough," Marker replied, his voice neutral. "Less now than before." "Before what?" before I saved his brother's life when Apache raiders attacked their ranch. A hint of wry humor touched his lips. Hard to hate someone when you owe them blood debt, even for Wilson. They reached a 2-story clapboard house with a small sign reading, Henderson Boarding House. A lamp burned in the window, casting a warm glow. "This is where I leave you," Maka said, setting down her bag. Clara met his eyes. "Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Maka." "Just Maka," he corrected gently. "And you're welcome, Miss Ainsworth." "Clara," she offered in return. He nodded, a subtle acknowledgement of something neither of them could name yet. "What will you do now?" he asked. Clara's shoulders sagged slightly. "I don't know. I have no return ticket, no prospects." She attempted a smile. "But I'm alive and have a roof for tonight. Tomorrow's problems can wait until tomorrow." Maka studied her face for a moment. "I'm heading to Fort Braverton tomorrow. The Indian agent there is looking for a school teacher for the reservation children, someone who can teach English and numbers." "I've never taught before," Clara said uncertainly. "Have you ever been a frontier wife before?" When she shook her head, he continued, "Yet you were willing to try. Sometimes life offers different paths than we expect." Before Clara could respond, the boarding house door opened, revealing a plump woman with grey-streaked hair tied in a bun. "Miss Ainsworth, I'm Mrs. Henderson. Come in, dear. You must be exhausted." Clara turned back to thank Maka once more, but he was already walking away, a solitary figure melting into the shadows of Silver Creek's moonlit streets. Mrs. Henderson's boarding house was modest, but meticulously clean. The parlor contained a faded settee, 2 armchairs with crocheted doilies on the armrests, and a small upright piano in the corner. Sepia-toned photographs lined the walls, landscapes Clara didn't recognize, and faces of people she would never meet. "Your room is upstairs, second door on the right," Mrs. Henderson said, leading the way. "Bathrooms at the end of the hall. We have running water, thank the Lord, one of the few places in town that does." The room was small but cozy, with a narrow bed, a washstand with a porcelain basin, and a chest of drawers topped by a small mirror. A window overlooked the main street, now quiet in the deepening night. "Breakfast is at 7, Mrs. Henderson continued. "I've put out some fresh towels and left a pitcher of water. You must be parched after your journey." When the older woman had gone, Clara sank onto the bed. The mattress was stuffed with straw rather than feathers, but at that moment it felt like the softest bed in the world. She was too tired to even unpack her bag. Kicking off her boots, she lay back and stared at the ceiling. James Thornton was dead. The future she had imagined, difficult but straightforward, had vanished. And yet a small voice whispered in the back of her mind. Hadn't she been slightly relieved? To marry a stranger, sight unseen, had been an act of desperation. What kind of marriage would it have been? Her thoughts drifted to Maka, to his unexpected kindness. The teaching position he'd mentioned. She had taught her father's housekeeper's children to read once, years ago. They had been quick learners, their faces lighting up when they sounded out their first words. Sleep claimed her before she could follow the thought further. Morning brought clarity with its harsh light. Clara washed her face in the basin, dressed in her second-best dress, a simple blue cotton with white trim, and pinned her hair in a modest chignon. She needed to look presentable if she was going to find employment. In the dining room, 2 other boarders were already seated. A young man with spectacles who introduced himself as Peter Hawkins, the telegraph operator, and Miss Ida Jenkins, a middle-aged woman who served as Silver Creek's postmistress. "You're the one who came for James Thornton," Miss Jenkins said bluntly as she buttered her toast. "Such a shame. He was a good man." "Did you know him well?" Clara asked, accepting a cup of coffee from Mrs. Henderson. "Everyone knows everyone in Silver Creek," Miss Jenkins replied. "James came to check his mail every Wednesday, regular as clockwork, always polite, always asked after my rheumatism. He built half the furniture in this house," Mrs. Henderson added, setting a plate of eggs and bacon before Clara. had a real talent with wood. Clara glanced around, noticing the beautifully carved legs of the dining table for the first time. She had almost married a man who created such beauty, yet she would never know him. "I heard that Apache talking to you last night," Miss Jenkins said, her tone sharpening. "Macca, you want to be careful there." Peter Hawkins looked up from his newspaper. "Macca's all right, Miss Jenkins. He saved my life when my horse spooked and threw me during that thunderstorm last spring." "I'm not saying he isn't useful," Miss Jenkins sniffed. "Just that people should stay with their own kind." "He mentioned a teaching position at Fort Braverton," Clara said carefully, "for the reservation children." All three looked at her with varying expressions: surprise from Peter, disapproval from Miss Jenkins, and thoughtful consideration from Mrs. Henderson. "You're not seriously considering that?" Miss Jenkins asked. Fork paused halfway to her mouth. "I need employment," Clara replied simply, "and I've always enjoyed teaching." "There are positions here in town," Mrs. Henderson offered. "The mercantile needs help, and I'm sure Mr. Roberts would be happy to have someone with your refinement behind the counter. Or you could assist me at the post office," Miss Jenkins added, though her tone suggested she was merely being polite. "Thank you both," Clara said. "I'll certainly consider all options." After breakfast, Clara walked through Silver Creek, introducing herself to merchants and inquiring about work. The answers were polite but discouraging. Positions were filled, or the pay was barely enough for a single meal a day. By noon, she found herself at the edge of town again, staring at the distant mountains that seemed to shimmer in the heat. "Considering your options?" Clara turned to find Sheriff Miller approaching, hat in hand to shield his eyes from the sun. "Yes," she admitted, "though they seem limited. Heard you're thinking about Fort Braverton." When she looked surprised, he added, "Small town." "Would it be unwise?" she asked directly. The sheriff considered for a moment. "The reservation's relatively peaceful these days. The teaching position pays better than anything you'll find here. The government actually sends the funds on time, mostly. But it's a hard life, Miss Ainsworth. Isolated. And you'd be living between two worlds, belonging to neither." Clara thought of Boston, of her father's cold house, of the life she'd left behind. "I'm already between worlds, Sheriff." He nodded slowly. "Stage to Fort Braverton leaves tomorrow morning. I could speak to the driver if you're decided." She took a deep breath. "Yes, I believe I am." That evening, Clara sat in the boarding house parlor, writing a letter to her childhood friend in Boston, the only person who might worry about her whereabouts. She explained her situation and her decision, knowing the letter would take weeks to reach its destination. "You're really going then?" Mrs. Henderson asked, pausing in her knitting. "Yes," Clara said, folding the letter. "I don't see another choice that makes sense." "There's always choices, dear. Just depends on what you're willing to pay for them." Mrs. Henderson's needles clicked rhythmically. "My Henry always said, sometimes the right path and the easy path ain't the same." "Was coming west the right path for you?" Clara asked. The older woman smiled, her eyes distant with memory. "Hardest and best decision I ever made. Never regretted it, even after Henry passed." Clara sealed her letter with a wafer of wax. "I hope I can say the same someday." Dawn broke clear and cool over Silver Creek. Clara stood beside the stagecoach, her carpetbag at her feet, wearing her traveling dress once more. Sheriff Miller handed her a small packet. "Your week's not up at the boarding house," he explained. "This is what's left of Thornton's money. Not much, but it'll help until your first pay comes." "Thank you," Clara said, touched by his thoughtfulness. The stage driver secured her bag and offered his hand to help her inside. The coach was empty. No other passengers were traveling to the remote fort this day. As the horses started forward with a jolt, Clara caught a glimpse of Macca at the edge of town, mounted on a chestnut horse. Their eyes met briefly before the stagecoach rounded a bend and Silver Creek disappeared from view. Fort Braverton awaited, and with it, a future Clara could never have imagined when she left Boston just weeks before. The stagecoach journey to Fort Braverton took 6 grueling hours across a landscape that grew increasingly wild and barren. Clara watched as the terrain changed from scattered homesteads to untamed wilderness, punctuated by towering rock formations that cast long shadows across the rutted trail. Dust seeped through every crack in the coach, coating Clara's skin and clothing with a fine layer of red-brown powder. The heat intensified as the day progressed, and her canteen of water, which had seemed plentiful at the outset, was nearly empty by midday. "Fort's just beyond that rise," the driver called down from his perch as they crested a hill in the late afternoon. "You sure about this, ma'am? Still time to turn back." "I'm certain," Clara replied, though her heart fluttered with apprehension. Fort Braverton was not what she had expected. Rather than an imposing military installation, she saw a scattering of wooden buildings surrounded by a low stone wall. A few soldiers in dusty blue uniforms moved about the central yard. Beyond the fort's walls stretched the reservation, dozens of canvas tents and traditional wickiups spread across the valley, with small garden plots interspersed among the dwellings. The coach pulled to a stop before the main gate. A soldier helped Clara down, her legs stiff from the journey. "Miss Ainsworth?" A tall, thin man with a neatly trimmed beard approached. He wore civilian clothes, a crisp white shirt despite the heat, a waistcoat and a string tie. "I'm Benjamin Aldridge, Indian agent for this reservation. Sheriff Miller telegraphed that you were coming." "Yes, I'm Clara Ainsworth," she confirmed, trying to brush the dust from her dress. "Thank you for considering me for the teaching position." Aldridge's gaze was appraising, but not unkind. "To be frank, Miss Ainsworth, we've had difficulty finding anyone willing to take the post. The last teacher lasted 3 weeks before returning east." Clara straightened her shoulders. "I have nowhere to return to, Mr. Aldridge. I intend to make this work." A hint of approval flickered in his eyes. "Very good. Let me show you where you'll be staying." He led her through the fort to a small building set apart from the others. "This was originally built as an officer's quarters, but we've repurposed it for the teacher. It's modest but private." Inside was a single room containing a narrow bed, a washstand, a small table with 2 chairs, and a pot-bellied stove for cooking and heat. A bookshelf held a dozen worn volumes, and a faded curtain partitioned off a corner for changing clothes. "The schoolhouse is there," Aldridge said, pointing through the single window to a slightly larger building about 50 yards away. "Classes begin at 8. You'll have approximately 20 children, ages 6 to 14. "What materials do I have to work with?" Clara asked, setting down her carpet bag. "Primers, slates, some paper and pencils. The government allocation is minimal." Aldridge's tone suggested this was a constant frustration. "Dinner is served in the mess hall at 6. I'll introduce you to Captain Reynolds and the other officers then." Left alone, Clara sank onto the bed, overwhelmed by the reality of her situation. The room was clean but Spartan, a far cry from her comfortable Boston home. Through the window, she could see Apache women moving between the dwellings, carrying water or tending fires. Children played in the dust, their laughter carrying on the wind. A knock at the door startled her. She opened it to find a young Apache woman, perhaps 17 or 18, standing with folded linens in her arms. "For bed," the girl said in halting English. "I am Nasha." She pronounced it Nashchar, with a soft emphasis on the first syllable. "Thank you, Nasha. I'm Clara." She accepted the linens and stepped back, inviting the girl inside. Nasha entered cautiously, her dark eyes taking in every detail of Clara's appearance. "You new teacher?" "Yes. Do you attend the school?" The girl shook her head. "Before. Now I help my mother." She gestured vaguely toward the reservation. You need help? Water? Food? I'm fine for now, thank you. Clara smiled, trying to bridge the awkwardness. Will I see you at the school sometimes? Nasha's expression remained guarded. Maybe. Brother comes, Tarek. He is 7. She paused, seeming to search for words. He's smart, learns quick. I look forward to meeting him. Nasha nodded and turned to leave, but paused at the door. Maka says you kind, not like other white teachers. Clara's heart skipped. You know Maka? Cousin, Nasha said simply. He comes tonight. With that, she slipped out, leaving Clara with more questions than answers. At 6 o'clock, Clara made her way to the mess hall, having changed into her last clean dress and attempted to tame her travel-worn appearance. The hall was dominated by a long table where a dozen blue-uniformed men were already seated. Their conversation halted abruptly when she entered. Captain Reynolds, a stocky man with a greying mustache, stood and offered her a seat beside him. Miss Ainsworth, welcome. Aldridge tells me you're brave enough to take on our school. Brave or foolish, sir, depending on one's perspective, Clara replied, earning a few chuckles from the officers. The meal was simple but hearty. Venison stew, cornbread and stewed apples. Clara ate gratefully, realizing how hungry she'd been. The conversation revolved around military matters and reservation governance, with occasional efforts to include her. The children are well behaved, Miss Ainsworth, Lieutenant Foster, a young officer with kind eyes, assured her. But they're caught between two worlds. Most don't see the value in our education. Or perhaps we haven't shown them its value, Clara suggested gently. An uncomfortable silence followed, broken by Captain Reynolds. Miss Ainsworth brings up a fair point, gentlemen. We ask them to learn our ways without demonstrating why they should. As dinner concluded, Clara noticed a commotion at the fort's gates. Through the window, she saw riders entering, Apache men returning from what appeared to be a hunting party. Among them, unmistakable even at a distance, was Maka. The scouts are back, Aldridge noted, following her gaze. They've been tracking a group of renegades from the mountains. Clara excused herself and stepped outside, drawn by some impulse she couldn't name. The evening air had cooled, bringing relief after the day's heat. She watched as the men dismounted and began unloading their horses. Maka spotted her immediately, as though he'd been expecting her. He handed his reins to another scout and approached, removing his hat. Miss Ainsworth, you made it safely. Yes, though the journey was longer than I expected. Most journeys are. His expression softened slightly. How do you find Fort Braverton? Different from what I imagined, she admitted. But I'm determined to make the best of it. Maka nodded, his eyes reflecting the golden light of sunset. The children will test you. They've learned that white teachers don't stay. I'm not going anywhere, Clara said firmly, surprised by her own certainty. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. We shall see. From the mess hall doorway, Aldridge called, Miss Ainsworth, Captain Reynolds would like a word before you retire. I should go, she said reluctantly. Tomorrow then, Maka replied. I'll bring Tarek to school. He's been resistant to attending since the last teacher left. Nasha mentioned him. She said he's bright. Something like pride flickered in Maka's eyes. Yes, too bright sometimes. He questions everything. The best students often do, Clara said with a smile. As she turned to go, Maka spoke again, his voice low. It won't be easy what you're attempting. There will be resistance from both sides. Clara looked back at him. Nothing worthwhile ever comes easily, does it? Later, Lying on her narrow bed in the darkened quarters, Clara listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the desert night, coyotes calling in the distance, the muffled voices of soldiers on watch, the whisper of wind against the building's wooden walls. Tomorrow, she would meet her students, begin teaching in a place utterly foreign to her. Fear and excitement warred within her heart, but underlying both was a strange sense of rightness, as if some invisible thread had been guiding her to this place all along. Dawn broke over the reservation, painting the sky in streaks of crimson and gold. Clara had been awake for hours, arranging the schoolroom and reviewing the few teaching materials available. The primers were outdated, the maps showed boundaries that no longer existed, and the slate boards were cracked and worn. At precisely 8 o'clock, she stood at the schoolhouse door, heart pounding as children began to arrive. They came in small groups, some led by mothers who regarded Clara with wary expressions, others wandering in alone. Most wore a mixture of traditional garments and cast-off American clothing. All carried the same guarded look in their eyes. Maka arrived with a small boy whose resemblance to him was unmistakable. The same high cheekbones and straight nose, though the child's eyes held a defiant spark that his elder's controlled demeanor concealed. "Miss Ainsworth, this is Tarak," Maka said formally. "Tarak, greet your new teacher properly." The boy stepped forward, his chin raised. "Good morning," he said clearly, though his eyes remained suspicious. "Good morning, Tarak," Clara replied warmly. "I'm very pleased to meet you." Maka nodded, satisfied. "I'll return when classes end," he told the boy, then added to Clara, "He understands English better than most. If you have trouble, he can translate." By 8:30, 18 children between 6 and 14 years old had assembled in the schoolroom. They sat in rigid silence, watching Clara's every move. "Good morning," she began, feeling awkward under their collective gaze. "My name is Miss Ainsworth, and I'm your new teacher." Blank stares met her introduction. Clara took a deep breath and continued. "I thought we might begin by learning each other's names." She went around the room, asking each child to stand and introduce themselves. Some spoke clearly, others mumbled, and a few remained silent until Tarak translated Clara's request, adding something in Apache that made the reluctant ones comply, albeit grudgingly. "Now," Clara said when they'd finished, "I'd like to see what you already know. Could each of you take a slate and chalk?" The next hour proved discouraging. Some of the older children could write their names in shaky letters, but most could barely hold the chalk properly. They watched her demonstrations with expressions ranging from confusion to indifference. When she tried to engage them with questions, they fell silent or spoke so softly she could barely hear them. By mid-morning, Clara's confidence was flagging. She had prepared lessons, assuming a basic foundation that wasn't there. Glancing out the window, she noticed Maka standing in the shadow of a cottonwood tree, observing the proceedings with an unreadable expression. In desperation, she changed tactics. "Put away your slates," she instructed. "We're going outside." Confusion rippled through the classroom, but the children followed her into the schoolyard. Clara picked up a stick and began drawing in the dirt, a large circle with smaller circles inside it. "This," she explained, "is our solar system, the sun and planets." She pointed to the center. "The sun gives us light and heat." Tarak edged closer, his interest piqued despite himself. "Like fire spirit," he said. Clara smiled. "Yes, in a way. And these are planets that circle around it." She added more details to her drawing. "We live here, on Earth." The children gathered around, their earlier reticence fading as Clara used the dirt as her canvas, drawing continents and oceans, explaining day and night as Earth's rotation. She had always found astronomy fascinating, and her enthusiasm began to break through the language barrier. When she demonstrated how the moon orbited Earth using 2 children to play the parts, giggles erupted for the first time. Tarek volunteered to be the sun, standing proudly as the others circled him. When they returned to the classroom, the atmosphere had transformed. The children still struggled with the written lessons, but now they were trying, looking to Clara with something approaching trust. As the day ended and the children filed out, Tarek lingered. "Tomorrow we learn more sky things?" he asked. "Yes," Clara promised, "and perhaps you can teach me something too." The boy considered this, then nodded solemnly before running to meet Maka, who waited beyond the schoolyard fence. Later that evening, Clara sat on the single step outside her quarters, watching the sunset. The day had been both more difficult and more rewarding than she had anticipated. "They responded to you," Maka said, approaching from the direction of the reservation. "I didn't expect that on the first day." "It was a small beginning," Clara replied. "I have so much to learn about teaching them effectively." Maka settled on the step beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. "What made you think of the stars?" "I needed something they could see, something that belongs to all of us." She looked up at the darkening sky where the first stars were appearing. The same stars shine over Boston and Arizona. They sat in companionable silence for a moment. "May I ask you something?" Clara ventured. When Maka nodded, she continued, "Why are you here? At the fort, I mean. Sheriff Miller spoke of you with respect, yet I am Apache and should be with my people exclusively." There was no bitterness in his tone, only a weary understanding. "That's not what I meant," Clara said quickly, "but it is what many think." Maka gazed toward the reservation. "I was educated at Carlisle Indian School in Pennsylvania. The government's attempt to civilize the savage. They took our language, cut our hair, dressed us like white men. Some of us fought it, others embraced it. I chose a middle path, to learn what was useful without forgetting who I am." "And now you work for them," Clara observed softly. "I work for my people," he corrected. "As a translator, I ensure our words aren't twisted. As a scout, I keep peace where I can." His dark eyes met hers. "We all find our ways to survive, Miss Ainsworth." Clara thought of her own journey, the desperate choice to become a mail-order bride, the unexpected twist that had brought her here instead. "Yes," she agreed. "We do what we must." A call from the fort interrupted their conversation. Aldridge, summoning Maka for a meeting. He rose to his feet in one fluid motion. "Tomorrow will be harder," he warned. "The novelty will have worn off." Clara smiled. "Then I'll have to find new stars to show them." Maka's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "I believe you will." Weeks passed, each day bringing small victories and frustrating setbacks. Clara developed a routine, rising before dawn, preparing her lessons, teaching until midday, then continuing with individual instruction for the older children while the younger ones practiced their letters. The children had begun to trust her, especially Tarek, who appointed himself her unofficial assistant. He translated when needed, helped distribute materials, and stayed after school to learn additional lessons. His questions were insightful, often forcing Clara to think beyond her Boston education. "Why sky blue?" he asked one afternoon as they sat beneath the cottonwood tree. "Well, it's because... Actually, I'm not entirely sure," Clara admitted. "I'll find out for you." Tarek nodded, satisfied with her honesty. "Old teacher said, because God made it so, when we ask why." "And what did you think of that answer?" The boy grinned. "Not answer at all." Clara laughed, delighting in his perception. "You're right. It's not a proper explanation." As October arrived, bringing cooler temperatures, Clara found herself increasingly drawn to the reservation. Nasha had invited her to observe as the women prepared traditional foods, and though some regarded her with suspicion, others began to teach her simple Apache phrases and customs. "You hold like this," an elderly woman named Talasi demonstrated, guiding Clara's hands as they ground corn between stones. Gentle but firm. Clara's wrists ached from the unfamiliar motion, but she persisted, rewarded by Talasi's approving nod. These women's lives were so different from what she had known, harder in many ways, yet rich with community and purpose. Maka often appeared during these visits, sometimes joining her walk back to the fort as the sun set. Their conversations ranged from philosophical discussions about education to practical matters concerning the reservation. He never spoke of personal matters, and Clara respected the boundary, though she found herself increasingly curious about the man behind the careful facade. The children mentioned a ceremony soon, Clara said as they walked one evening. Several won't attend school that day. The sunrise ceremony, Maka confirmed. It celebrates a girl's transition to womanhood. The whole community gathers. It sounds beautiful. It is. He hesitated, then added, "You could attend if you wish, as my guest." The invitation surprised her. "Would that be appropriate? I wouldn't want to intrude." "Some will not welcome you," he acknowledged. "Others will see it as respect for our ways." "And what do you see it as?" Clara asked quietly. Maka stopped walking, his gaze direct. A chance to understand, not just observe. Clara felt something shift between them, a subtle recognition of growing trust. "Then I would be honored to attend." Their moment was interrupted by Lieutenant Foster, who approached with quick strides. "Miss Ainsworth, Mr. Aldridge requests your presence immediately." His expression was grave. "There's been an incident." Maka tensed beside her. "What happened?" "Not my place to say," Foster replied, his tone clipped. Clara exchanged a glance with Maka before following the lieutenant to Aldridge's office. Inside, the Indian agent paced behind his desk, agitation evident in every movement. Captain Reynolds stood by the window, his face set in hard lines. "Miss Ainsworth," Aldridge began without preamble, "were you aware that you've been teaching the children Apache songs and stories?" Clara frowned, confused. "Some of the older students have been teaching me simple phrases, and occasionally they share stories." "That was not part of your assignment," Aldridge cut in. "You were brought here to teach English, arithmetic, and proper American values." "I don't understand the concern," Clara said carefully. "Learning is an exchange. When they share their culture, they're more receptive to what I teach." Captain Reynolds turned from the window. "The concern, Miss Ainsworth, is that we're trying to integrate these people into civilized society. Encouraging their old ways undermines that goal." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "With all due respect, sir, their old ways, as you call them, are their heritage. Surely education doesn't require erasing their identity." "That is precisely what it requires," Aldridge stated flatly. "You cannot be both savage and civilized." The word savage stung Clara like a physical blow. She thought of Tarek's bright intelligence, of Nash's gentle dignity, of the women who had patiently taught her their crafts. "If that's what you believe, Mr. Aldridge, then I fear we have very different understandings of education." Her voice was steady despite her racing heart. "And of civilization." Aldridge's face darkened. "You forget your place, Miss Ainsworth. You are employed by the United States government, not by the Apache tribe." "I am employed to teach children," Clara replied. "All children learn best when their knowledge is built upon, not torn down and replaced." "This discussion is over," Aldridge snapped. "You will confine yourself to the approved curriculum, or we will find someone who will." Clara left the office with her head high, though inside she trembled with anger and uncertainty. Outside, the sun had set, leaving the fort in twilight shadow. She was halfway to her quarters when she realized Maka was walking beside her. "You heard?" she asked, not breaking stride. "Enough!" His voice was low, controlled. Aldridge has never understood our ways, but he's grown worse lately. There's talk of removing children to boarding schools back east." Clara stopped abruptly. "He can't do that." "He can. The government gives him that authority." Marka's expression was grim. "It's already happening on other reservations." The thought of her students, Tarek especially, being torn from their families and sent thousands of miles away to have their culture stripped from them, made Clara's stomach clench. "What can we do?" she whispered. Marka's eyes met hers, dark and intent in the fading light. "We continue, carefully." In that moment, Clara understood that their alliance had deepened into something more, a shared purpose that transcended their different backgrounds. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The following days brought a palpable change to Fort Braverton. Aldridge made frequent, unannounced visits to Clara's classroom, watching her lessons with critical eyes. Captain Reynolds assigned a young soldier to assist her, a thinly veiled attempt to monitor her teaching. Even some of the officers who had previously been friendly grew distant, uncomfortable with her defiance of authority. Only Lieutenant Foster remained overtly supportive. "Not everyone agrees with Aldridge," he told her quietly as they passed in the fort yard. "But few will speak against him." Clara adapted her approach, teaching the required curriculum when observed while finding subtle ways to incorporate Apache culture into her lessons. She used traditional counting games to teach mathematics and encouraged the children to write stories about their lives for English practice. Tarek seemed to understand the delicate balance she was trying to maintain. "We pretend for white eyes," he whispered one day when Aldridge departed, "but we know true things." His perception both warmed and troubled her. Children shouldn't have to navigate such political complexities, yet here was this 7-year-old boy, wise beyond his years in the ways of survival. The morning of the sunrise ceremony arrived cool and clear. Clara dressed with care in her best dress, a deep blue cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. She'd spent the evening washing and pressing it, wanting to show proper respect for the occasion. Mahka came for her before dawn, wearing traditional clothing she had never seen him in before: buckskin leggings, a beaded shirt, and moccasins decorated with intricate patterns. A single eagle feather was tied into his hair, which hung loose past his shoulders instead of in his usual neat braid. "You look," Clara began, then faltered, suddenly self-conscious. "Different?" he supplied, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "Yourself," she finished softly. Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or appreciation. He inclined his head slightly. "As do you, Clara Ainsworth." It was the first time he had called her by her first name. The sound of it in his deep voice sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. They walked in companionable silence as the eastern sky lightened from black to deep purple. The reservation was already stirring, with people gathering around a central clearing where 4 poles had been erected in a square. In the center, a young girl of about 13 sat on a blanket, her mother and aunts preparing her for the ceremony. "That's Liluya," Mahka explained quietly, "Nasha's cousin. The ceremony lasts 4 days, but this morning is the most sacred part." Clara noticed the curious and sometimes disapproving glances cast her way. Nasha approached, wearing a beautifully beaded dress, her expression both surprised and pleased to see Clara. "You came," she said simply. "Mahka invited me," Clara replied. "I hope that's acceptable." Nasha exchanged a look with Mahka that Clara couldn't interpret. "Come," she said finally, "stand with the women." As the first rays of sun appeared on the horizon, drums began to beat, a slow, steady rhythm that seemed to match Clara's heartbeat. The assembled Apache formed a circle around Lilui and the 4 poles. An elderly medicine man began to chant, his voice rising and falling in cadences Clara couldn't understand, but found deeply moving. Liluye stood, her face solemn and proud, as 4 young women approached, each carrying a basket of pollen. They began a dance around her, their movements graceful and precise. The medicine man continued his chant, occasionally sprinkling sacred items, eagle feathers, pieces of turquoise and herbs around the girl. "He's blessing her with the power of white-painted woman," Maka murmured close to Clara's ear. "She will dance to the 4 directions, taking in strength from each." The ceremony continued as the sun rose higher, the entire community participating in songs and prayers. Clara watched, entranced by the beauty and meaning of each element, by the evident love surrounding the young girl as she took her place as a woman of the tribe. "It's beautiful," she whispered to Nasha. The young woman nodded. "This is how we become strong, together." Clara glanced across the circle to where Maka stood with the men, his face illuminated by the morning light. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up, their eyes meeting over the assembled people. In that moment, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition that transcended the boundaries that separated their worlds. The ceremony concluded with a feast. Despite some initial wariness, the women made room for Clara, offering her traditional foods, acorn stew, roasted mesquite beans, and flatbread made from ground seeds. Talasi, the elder who had taught Clara to grind corn, settled beside her. "You see now," she said, her weathered face creased in a smile. "Our ways are good ways, strong ways." "Yes," Clara agreed. "I wish Mr. Aldridge could understand that." Talasi's smile faded. "He does not want to understand. He wants to change, to break." "Not all white people think as he does," Clara said gently. The old woman studied her face. "No, some learn to see with new eyes." She patted Clara's hand before moving away to help serve the other guests. As the celebration continued, Clara noticed a commotion at the edge of the gathering. Aldridge had arrived on horseback, accompanied by 2 soldiers. His face was thunderous as he dismounted and strode toward the feast. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, ignoring the ceremonial nature of the gathering. "Miss Ainsworth, you were explicitly forbidden from participating in native rituals." The joyful atmosphere evaporated instantly. Children scurried behind their mothers, and the men stepped forward, their postures tense. Maka moved to intercept Aldridge. "This is a sacred ceremony, Agent Aldridge. You have no right to interfere." "I have every right," Aldridge snapped. "These gatherings foster resistance to progress. They're to be discouraged." Clara stepped forward, keenly aware of all eyes upon her. "Mr. Aldridge, I was invited as a guest to observe an important cultural tradition. There's nothing subversive happening here. You overreach your position, Miss Ainsworth." Aldridge's voice was cold. "Return to the fort immediately. We'll discuss your continued employment later." Before Clara could respond, Liluye's father spoke up, his English halting but determined. "She welcome here. You not welcome bringing soldiers to our ceremony." Aldridge's face reddened. "I am the appointed agent of the United States government. I am welcome wherever I choose to go on this reservation." The tension was palpable. Clara saw hands moving toward weapons, both the soldiers and some of the Apache men's. "Please," she said quietly to Aldridge, "don't ruin this special day. I'll return to the fort with you now if that will resolve the matter." Maka caught her arm. "You don't need to go," he said in a low voice. Clara met his eyes. "Yes, I do. For now." She turned to Liluye and her family. "Thank you for allowing me to share in your celebration. It was an honor I won't forget." With dignity, she walked to Aldridge's side. "Shall we, Mr. Aldridge?" The agent seemed almost disappointed to have been denied a confrontation. He nodded curtly and turned his horse, expecting Clara to walk alongside. As they departed, Clara glanced back once to see Marka watching her, his expression unreadable, but his eyes never leaving hers until distance separated them. At the fort, Aldridge delivered his ultimatum in the privacy of his office. "Your behavior is unacceptable, Miss Ainsworth. You were hired to civilize, not to go native. You have a choice: conform to expectations or leave Fort Braverton." Clara stood straight, her hands clasped before her to hide their trembling. "And the children's education? We'll manage until a suitable replacement arrives." "I see." Clara took a deep breath. "May I have until tomorrow to consider?" Aldridge nodded, already turning his attention to papers on his desk. "Tomorrow at noon, not a minute later." Clara spent a sleepless night weighing her options. To stay meant compromising her principles and teaching in a way that felt harmful to the children. To leave meant abandoning them entirely to Aldridge's assimilation policies. Neither choice seemed acceptable. Dawn found her sitting on her narrow bed, a sheet of paper before her. She had drafted and discarded a dozen resignation letters, none capturing the complexity of her feelings. A knock at her door startled her from her thoughts. Lieutenant Foster stood outside, hat in hand, his expression troubled. "Miss Ainsworth, I hope I'm not disturbing you too early." "Not at all, Lieutenant. Please come in." He entered but remained standing, clearly uncomfortable. "I've heard about Aldridge's ultimatum. News travels quickly here." "I'm still considering my response," Clara said carefully. Foster twisted his hat in his hands. "There's something you should know. A telegram arrived last night from the Bureau of Indian Affairs. They've approved Aldridge's request to send 15 Apache children to the Carlisle School in Pennsylvania." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. 15? Which ones? "The list includes Tarek." Foster's voice dropped lower. "The telegrams have been crossing back and forth for weeks. Aldridge planned this well before your disagreement." "When?" Clara whispered, her mind racing. "The children are to be collected next week. A government agent is already on his way." Foster replaced his hat. "I thought you should know. Not everyone at the fort supports this, but few will speak against it openly." After he left, Clara sat motionless, her resignation letter forgotten. Sending the children thousands of miles away would devastate the community and destroy the fragile trust she'd built. She thought of Tarek's bright eyes and curious mind, of how he'd finally begun to thrive in her classroom. Her decision crystallized with sudden clarity. She wouldn't resign, nor would she comply with Aldridge's demands. Instead, she would use the time she had left to prepare the children and their families for what was coming, and perhaps find a way to prevent it. The schoolroom felt different that morning. Clara looked at each child with new awareness, wondering which ones were on Aldridge's list. They sensed her distraction, growing restless as the morning progressed. "Something wrong, teacher?" Tarek asked during their arithmetic lesson. Clara hesitated, then set aside the lesson book. "Children, I want to tell you a story about a school far away." She described Carlisle Indian School, the uniforms, the haircuts, the strict rules against speaking native languages. She explained how children were separated from their families for years, how they were given new names and taught to forget their old ways. "Some people believe this is good for you," she finished honestly. "They think it will help you succeed in the changing world. But I believe you can learn new things without losing who you are." The older children's faces had grown solemn as they understood the implications. Tarek's brow furrowed in concentration. "They want to send us away?" he asked directly. Clara met his eyes. "Some of you, yes. I don't know who yet." One of the older girls raised her hand. "My cousin went to white school. Came back different. Wouldn't speak Apache anymore." "Will you go with us, teacher?" a younger boy asked, his voice small. "No," Clara admitted. I wouldn't be allowed. The classroom fell silent. Clara's heart ached at the fear and confusion on their faces. "Listen to me," she said firmly. "No matter what happens, remember who you are. Keep your stories and your language in your heart, even if you can't speak them aloud. And know that you are not alone, even when it feels that way." After dismissing the children, Clara headed straight to Aldridge's office. The Indian agent looked up from his desk with a hint of smugness. "Have you made your decision, Miss Ainsworth?" "Yes," Clara replied, her voice steady. "I will continue teaching as long as you allow me to remain at Fort Braverton." Aldridge's eyebrows rose. "And you agree to follow the approved curriculum? No more native influences?" "I'll teach what the children need to know," Clara said carefully. "That's not what I asked. It's the only answer I can give in good conscience." Aldridge studied her for a moment, then shrugged. "Very well. You may continue for now. But know that I'll be watching closely, and at the first sign of insubordination, you'll be dismissed without reference." "There's something else," Clara said, steeling herself. "I understand some children are being sent to Carlisle School." Aldridge's expression hardened. "That information is not your concern. They are my students. Of course it's my concern." "The decisions have been made at the highest levels," Aldridge said dismissively. "The children will benefit from proper education away from tribal influences. This conversation is over, Miss Ainsworth." Clara left the office with her heart pounding. She needed to find Marker immediately. She located him at the edge of the reservation, mending a fence with several other men. His face betrayed no surprise when she approached, as if he had been expecting her. "We need to talk," Clara said without preamble. "Privately." Marker nodded to the other men and led Clara to a stand of cottonwoods beyond earshot. "You know about Carlisle," he stated, rather than asked. "Lieutenant Foster told me this morning Tarek is on the list." Marker's expression remained controlled, but Clara saw the muscle in his jaw tighten. "I know. I saw the telegram on Aldridge's desk yesterday. 15 children, including my nephew." "Your nephew?" Clara repeated, confused. "I thought Tarek was your son." "He is my brother's son," Marker explained. "My brother died 3 years ago in a skirmish with settlers. I have raised Tarek since then." The revelation gave Clara pause. "I'm sorry, I didn't know." "There is much we do not know about each other, Clara Ainsworth." His dark eyes held hers for a moment before he looked away. "The families have not been told yet. Aldridge plans to announce it when the government agent arrives, giving them no time to resist or hide the children." "That's monstrous," Clara whispered. "Can't you appeal to someone higher than Aldridge?" "To whom? The government sees us as problems to be solved, not people to be respected." "Then we need another plan," Clara insisted. "We can't let them take the children." Marker's gaze sharpened. "We? Yes, we. Those children are as important to me as they are to you." She hesitated, then added more softly, "Perhaps not in the same way, but important nonetheless." Something shifted in his expression, a softening, a recognition. "You risk much by involving yourself in this." "And you risk more," she acknowledged. "But I can't stand by and do nothing." Marker was silent for a long moment, considering. "There is a place," he said finally, "in the mountains to the north. A hidden canyon where some of our people went during the last treaty negotiations. It's difficult to find if you don't know the way." "You're suggesting hiding the children?" Clara asked, understanding dawning. "Not all 15. That would be too many to move secretly. But some, those most likely to resist, those with the strongest spirits, like Tarek." "How would we get them there? When?" "The night before the agent arrives." Marker's voice was low, intense. "I would need help creating a distraction at the fort." "I could do that," Clara said, her mind already racing with possibilities. "If we're caught, you would be arrested, possibly charged with kidnapping." Clara took a deep breath. I understand the risk. Maka studied her face. Why would you do this? You hardly know us. Because it's right, she said simply. And because in the short time I've been here, I've come to care about these children and their people more than I ever thought possible. The air between them seemed to still, charged with unspoken emotion. Maka reached out slowly and took her hand. His palm was rough with calluses, warm against her skin. "Thank you," he said quietly, the words carrying a weight far beyond their simplicity. They stood together beneath the cottonwoods, hands joined, as the afternoon sun cast dappled shadows across their faces. In that moment, Clara felt the last boundaries between them beginning to dissolve, replaced by something new and fragile and unutterably precious. The days that followed passed in a blur of careful planning and mounting tension. Clara maintained her teaching routine while secretly preparing the children who would be hidden. She gave them each a small book and pencil, encouraging them to record their thoughts and stories even when they couldn't speak them aloud. "Like seeds," she told them, "you plant them now, and they'll grow later when it's safe." Nasha proved an invaluable ally, relaying messages between Maka and Clara when they couldn't meet directly. The young woman's initial shyness had transformed into quiet determination as she understood the stakes. "My brother went to white school," she confided to Clara. "He came back broken inside, could not remember our mother's songs." Lieutenant Foster continued to provide information from within the fort, though he maintained a cautious distance from their actual plan. "The agent arrives Thursday," he told Clara during a seemingly casual encounter in the fort yard. "Aldridge has arranged a welcome dinner." The night before the agent's arrival, Clara feigned illness and retired to her quarters early. Once darkness fell, she changed into the plain dark dress she had prepared, tying her hair back beneath a scarf. The moon was just a sliver in the sky, providing ideal cover for their mission. At precisely 9 o'clock, she slipped out her back window and made her way to the prearranged meeting spot behind the storehouse. Maka was waiting, his face partially concealed by shadow. "Are you certain?" he asked softly. "There's still time to change your mind." Clara shook her head. "I've never been more certain of anything." They moved silently toward the eastern edge of the fort, where the wall was lowest. The guard rotation that Maka had memorized left a 3-minute window when this section would be unwatched. They timed their crossing perfectly, helping each other over the rough stone barrier. Beyond the fort, 5 Apache families waited with their children, 7 in total, including Tarek. The youngest was 6, the oldest 14. Their faces were solemn, understanding the gravity of what was happening, even if they didn't comprehend all the implications. Clara knelt before them. "Remember what we practiced," she whispered. "Stay together, stay quiet." Tarek nodded gravely. "We remember, teacher." Clara embraced each child quickly, her throat tight with emotion. One of the mothers pressed something into her hand, a small woven bracelet of red and black threads. "Protection," the woman murmured, then stepped back, her eyes shining with tears she refused to shed. Their goodbye was interrupted by the sound of hoofbeats approaching from the direction of the fort. "Someone's coming," Maka warned, his body tensing. The families melted into the darkness with practiced ease. Maka pulled Clara into the shadow of a large boulder, his arm around her waist, holding her close against him. Her heart hammered, both from fear of discovery and from his proximity. The rider passed within 30 feet of their hiding place, one of the fort's scouts returning from patrol. For a breathless minute, they remained motionless until the sound of hoofbeats faded. "That was close," Clara whispered, becoming acutely aware of Maka's arm still around her, the warmth of his body against hers in the cool night air. "Too close," he agreed, his voice low near her ear. We need to move quickly now. The families reappeared from the darkness, and their journey began in earnest. Maka led them away from established trails, following paths visible only to his experienced eye. Clara stayed at the rear, helping the smallest child when he stumbled over rough terrain. They traveled through the night, stopping only briefly for water and rest. The children, to their credit, maintained near-perfect silence, understanding instinctively that sound could betray them. As dawn approached, they reached the entrance to a narrow canyon disguised by scrub brush and fallen rocks. Beyond it, Clara glimpsed a hidden valley with a small stream and shelter formed by overhanging cliffs. "We'll be safe here," Maka said, guiding the group inside. "The soldiers rarely patrol this far north, and those who do don't know these passages." The families quickly set about establishing a temporary camp, their movements practiced and efficient. Clara watched with admiration, recognizing how thoroughly they had prepared for this possibility. "Will you return with me?" Maka asked Clara as the first light of dawn touched the canyon walls. She hesitated. Her original plan had been to help with the escape, then return to the fort before her absence was discovered. But something had shifted during their night journey, a certainty that her place was no longer at Fort Braverton. "No," she said finally. "If I go back now, Aldridge will suspect my involvement as soon as the children are discovered missing. I can do more good by staying with them, continuing their education here." Maka studied her face in the growing light. "It would mean giving up everything. Your position, your way back to your world." "What world?" Clara asked softly. "Boston stopped being my home the moment I left it, and Fort Braverton was never more than a temporary shelter." She gazed at the children settling into their new sanctuary. "This feels more like home than anywhere I've been." Something changed in Maka's expression, a softening, an opening. He reached out, his fingers gently touching her cheek. "Clara!" A shout echoed through the canyon, startling them apart. One of the Apache men appeared at the ridge above, gesturing urgently. "Soldiers," he called down in a harsh whisper, "coming from the south." Maka's face hardened. How did they find us so quickly? They climbed to the lookout point and saw dust rising in the distance. At least a dozen riders following their trail with unsettling precision. "Someone must have seen us leave," Clara realized with growing dread. Maka nodded grimly. "You should stay with the children. I'll lead them away from here." "No," Clara caught his arm. "We started this together. We'll face it together." Before he could respond, a rifle shot cracked across the canyon. The shot had been fired into the air, a warning, not an attack. Clara and Maka crouched low behind the ridge as the riders approached. Maka signaled to the families to retreat deeper into the canyon while he unsheathed his knife, his expression resolute. "Wait," Clara whispered, squinting at the approaching dust cloud. "That's Lieutenant Foster in the lead." As the riders drew closer, she confirmed her observation. Foster rode at the front, followed by 6 soldiers, and unexpectedly, Nasha on a small paint pony. "Something's not right," Maka murmured. "Nasha wouldn't lead them here willingly." They descended to meet the approaching party. Foster raised his hand, signaling the others to halt, then dismounted and walked forward alone. "Miss Ainsworth, Maka," he called, his voice tight with urgency. "Thank God we found you in time." "What's happened?" Clara asked, her mind racing with possibilities. "Aldridge knows," Foster said grimly. "One of the stable boys saw you leaving and reported it. He's mobilized a full search party, 20 men with orders to bring back the children and arrest both of you for kidnapping." Maka's posture tensed. "Then why are you here, Lieutenant?" "To warn you." Foster removed his hat, revealing a sheen of sweat on his brow despite the cool morning air. "And to help, if I can. I don't agree with sending children thousands of miles from their families." Clara studied the young officer's face, searching for deception and finding none. "How did you find us?" Nasha, Foster replied. She was being questioned by Aldridge when I arrived. She agreed to lead us here by a faster route than the one you took so we could reach you before Aldridge's party. Nasha dismounted and approached, her expression a mixture of apology and determination. They already question families, say children stolen by you. She looked at Clara. I had to come. Bring help. Maka and Clara exchanged a glance. Years of mutual understanding compressed into a single moment. We have perhaps 2 hours before Aldridge reaches this area, Foster continued. My men and I will cover your tracks, lead them south while you head north. Why risk your career for us? Maka asked bluntly. Foster's eyes flickered toward Nasha briefly before returning to Maka. Let's just say I've learned that some orders deserve to be questioned, and some people deserve better than what the government offers them. Clara noted the subtle exchange between the lieutenant and Nasha, a gentle revelation of connections formed beyond her awareness. We need to move immediately, Maka decided. There's another canyon system 3 miles north that offers better protection. Foster nodded. We'll muddy these trails, then lead Aldridge's party toward the southern ravines. That should buy you at least a day's head start. He hesitated, then extended his hand to Maka. Good luck. After a moment's consideration, Maka clasped the offered hand. Thank you, Lieutenant. As Foster and his men prepared to depart, Clara touched his arm. You understand what this means for you? If Aldridge discovers your deception, I've requested a transfer to Fort Laramie, Foster said quietly. It was approved yesterday. I leave next week. His gaze shifted to where Nasha stood with the horses. Some journeys are worth the risk, Miss Ainsworth. I believe you understand that better than most. Within the hour, their small caravan was moving north through increasingly rugged terrain. The Apache families traveled with remarkable efficiency, carrying only what was essential, moving as one with the landscape rather than against it. By nightfall, they had reached the new canyon, a sheltered valley with a freshwater spring and natural caves that offered protection from the elements. As they established camp, Clara helped the children settle, resuming their lessons even in these extraordinary circumstances. Will soldiers find us here? Tarek asked as he practiced his letters on a small slate. No, Clara assured him. This place is well hidden, and we have friends helping to keep us safe. And then what? The boy's perceptive gaze seemed to look beyond the present moment. We cannot hide forever. Not hide. Clara considered her answer carefully. No, we can't. But we can use this time to prepare, to learn, to grow stronger. Sometimes retreat isn't surrender. It's gathering strength for what comes next. Later, as the children slept and the adults gathered around a small, carefully shielded fire, Maka outlined their options. The tribal elders listened attentively, their faces solemn in the flickering light. We could seek sanctuary with the Navajo to the north, he suggested, or continue west toward the territories where enforcement of reservation boundaries is less strict. And you, teacher? One of the mothers asked Clara. Will you come with us? All eyes turned to her, the Boston-bred woman who had somehow become integral to their community's future. Clara felt the weight of their gaze, the implicit trust in their question. If you'll have me, she replied simply. After the council dispersed, Clara walked to the edge of the campsite, where the valley opened to a view of the star-filled sky. Maka joined her silently, his presence beside her as natural as breathing. Are you certain this is what you want? He asked after a long moment. This life will not be easy. Clara smiled slightly. When has my life ever been easy? Even in Boston, I was always different, too questioning, too independent. My father called it my unfortunate stubbornness. I would call it strength, Maka said quietly. They stood in companionable silence, watching as a shooting star traced a brilliant path across the heavens. What happens next? Clara finally asked. Truly, Maka. Not just tomorrow or next week, but after that. He turned to face her, his expression more open than she had ever seen it. I don't know, Clara. No one does. But I know what I hope. Tell me, she urged softly. I hope we find a place where these children can grow up knowing both worlds without being torn apart by either, where they can speak their language and tell their stories without fear. He paused, his dark eyes holding hers. And I hope you are there, beside me, as we build that place together. Clara's heart quickened at the implication of his words. Is that possible? A woman like me and a man like you? It has never been done easily, he acknowledged, but we are both skilled at doing what has not been done before. With deliberate gentleness, he reached for her hand, entwining his fingers with hers. I cannot offer you a comfortable home or an easy life, but I can promise that you will never have to pretend with me. The echo of his first words to her that day in Silver Creek brought tears to Clara's eyes. That's all I've ever wanted, she whispered. Under the vast Arizona sky, their lips met in a kiss that bridged worlds. Tentative at first, then deepening with the certainty of a choice made not in haste or desperation, but with clear-eyed courage and abiding trust. 5 years later, the small settlement of Harmony Creek was unlike any other in the Arizona territory. Nestled in a hidden valley accessible only by a winding trail, it comprised a dozen sturdy cabins, several traditional Apache dwellings, and a schoolhouse with windows that gleamed in the morning sun. Clara Ainsworth, now known to some as Clara Maka, stood in the schoolhouse doorway, watching as children made their way to class. Some were Apache, others the children of settlers who had sought this community after being displaced by railroad expansion or disillusioned by broken government promises. Teacher! Teacher! Tarek, now 12 and tall for his age, ran toward her, waving a letter. It came yesterday with the trader, from Lieutenant Foster and Nasha. Clara accepted the envelope with a smile. Foster's transfer to Fort Laramie had eventually led to his resignation from the army. He and Nasha had married and settled near the Wyoming border, establishing a trading post that served as an important link in the network of safe havens for Native families seeking to avoid the reservation system. You're late for class, she chided gently. Sorry, Tarek grinned, not looking sorry at all. I was helping Father with the new irrigation channel. Then you'd better hurry. We're starting on algebra today. As Tarek took his seat inside, Clara felt a presence behind her. Maka stood there, a gentle smile warming his features as he watched the classroom fill with children. Successful? She asked, noting the satisfied set of his shoulders. Yes. The channel will bring water to the eastern fields next season. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, the simple gesture conveying years of shared purpose and deepening love. And your morning? Elizabeth delivered her baby just before dawn, a healthy boy. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of their own daughter, 2-year-old Lily, carried by one of the community's elders. The child reached for Clara with chubby arms, her dark eyes, so like her father's, bright with recognition. As Clara settled Lily on her hip, Maka's hand came to rest gently on the small of her back. The morning sun illuminated the three of them, a family that existed against all odds, a living bridge between worlds thought irreconcilable. I should start the lesson, Clara said reluctantly. Maka nodded, taking Lily from her arms. We'll see you at midday. He leaned in, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Te Inan, he whispered, I love you. The Apache words now as familiar to Clara as her native English. Clara watched them go, her heart full. The path that had brought her here had been neither straight nor easy. There had been hardships, prejudice, danger. There would be more challenges ahead as the territory moved towards statehood and government policies shifted with the political winds. But here, in this valley, they had created something precious. A community where children learned both the old ways and the new, where differences were respected rather than erased, where the best of both worlds could flourish together. Clara turned back to her classroom, to the eager faces waiting for the day's lessons. Once, long ago, she had arrived in Arizona territory in tears, with nothing but desperate hope and a single carpet bag. Now, she possessed something far more valuable, a home built on truth, a family founded on love, and a future limited only by the horizons they dared to imagine together.